frost on the wire, a man's breath fogging in the gray half-light of a November morning. Amos Tewksbury knelt in the mud with a mallet in one hand and a fistful of steel staples in the other, driving them into a post so old it had gone the color of ash. Behind him, a quarter-mile of split rail and rusted wire climbed a hill nobody had grazed in 30 years. Briars, sinkholes, a slope so rocky the county called it unimproved. He worked anyway, slow, steady, post after post. Above him, a hawk turned circles over ground that, as far as anyone in Noble Fork could tell, wasn't worth the sweat he was pouring into it. His daughter watched from the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, a mug of cocoa cooling in her hands. "Daddy," Junie called, "Mr. Ferris says you're fencing in nothing." Amos didn't look up. He set another post plumb, tapped it twice, and answered the way he answered most things lately, with his hands, not his mouth. Down the county road, a truck slowed just long enough for its driver to shake his head at the sight, then rolled on toward town. Nobody stopped to ask what Amos Tewksbury thought he was doing up there on that worthless ridge. But somewhere in that silence, a question was already taking root that not one soul in Breathitt County would be able to answer for another 11 months. If you're new here, this is the kind of story we tell. The ones about people the world was too quick to laugh at. Hit subscribe if you want more of them, and drop a comment letting me know what part of the country you're watching from tonight. It helps more than you'd think, and I read every one. Noble Fork sat tucked in a fold of the Kentucky hills, the kind of town where the post office doubled as the gossip exchange and everybody's business rode the party line before supper. The Tewksbury place had been there 5 generations. A clapboard farmhouse, a leaning barn, and 80 acres that dropped off into that same rocky ridge Amos was fencing, ground so poor even the goats had quit on it. His wife, Odalie, had died 2 winters back, leaving him with Junie, a mortgage on the equipment, and a grief he carried the way some men carry a limp, quiet, permanent, mostly hidden. Money was thin. Amos worked 3 days a week at the feed mill in Jackson and picked up carpentry when it came, but the numbers never quite closed. Every evening he sat at the kitchen table with a coffee can of receipts, doing arithmetic that never came out kind. Junie remembered her mother teaching her to shell beans at that same table, the radio low, her father's boots by the door still smelling of hay. That table had held better nights. Now it mostly held bills, and the particular hush of a house trying to hold itself together on less than it needed. The ridge itself was the family's one strange inheritance, 80 more acres behind the home place, steep and stony, deeded to Amos's people back before anybody could remember why. Nobody had run cattle on it in 3 decades. Blackberry and sumac had swallowed the old fence line whole. To the neighbors, it was simply the Goat Rocks, a punchline more than a property. So when Amos started hauling cedar posts up there in October, the talk in town took on a particular flavor, half pity, half entertainment, the kind reserved for a man everyone assumed had finally cracked under the weight of his own bad year. Garland Hooks, the county property assessor, put it plainer than most. He drove out one Tuesday in his county truck, clipboard in hand, and stood at the fence line watching Amos set a post. "You know this parcel's coming up for its 5-year agricultural review come next fall," Garland said. "Land like this doesn't stay classified as farmland just because somebody wishes it. Got to show active use, fencing, grazing, something the county can point to. Otherwise it reverts to vacant, and the tax bill on 80 acres of hillside timber land will about triple." Amos nodded slow. "I know it, Garland. That's why I'm out here." What Garland didn't know, what almost nobody knew yet, was that Amos had already been down to the courthouse and pulled every scrap of paper he could find on that ridge. The deed was old, hand-copied, the kind lawyers called imperfect. Half the original boundary records had burned in the courthouse fire of '87. All that remained to prove where the Tewksbury line ended and the state-held timber tract began was a faded 1962 survey map. And the ghost of a fence line, barely visible in an old aerial photograph Amos had found tucked inside his grandfather's Bible, pinned there like a keepsake nobody thought to explain. He didn't tell Garland any of that. He didn't tell anybody. He just kept setting posts, one after another, matching them as close as he could to the faint, overgrown scar of the old fence line his grandfather had built 60 years before. It was slow, brutal work, clearing brush with a machete before he could even swing a post-hole digger, hauling gravel up a slope steep enough to make a mule think twice. His hands blistered, then calloused. Junie brought him water some evenings, sat on a stump, and asked why he cared so much about keeping cows off a hill that didn't have any cows. "It's not about cows," Amos told her once, wiping sweat with his sleeve. "It's about the county knowing this land is ours, been ours, still is." Junie didn't fully understand, but she understood the tone, the same tone her mother used to use talking about things worth doing even when nobody was watching. Down at the diner, Odell Ferris held court most mornings over coffee, needling anybody who'd listen. "That boy spent $400 on fence wire for a hill a goat wouldn't climb," Odell said, laughing into his cup. "Grief does funny things to a man's judgment." By January, Amos had fenced nearly half the boundary, and then the weather turned against him hard. An ice storm dropped 2 inches of glaze over the ridge, snapping 3 of his newly set posts clean off and burying the rest under a crust he couldn't dig through for 11 straight days. Worse, the feed mill cut his hours to 2 days a week when a shipment contract fell through, and the coffee, arithmetic finally came out somewhere it had never come out before, behind. Amos sat at that kitchen table one night, staring at the receipts, and for the first time in months, he didn't reach for his boots the next morning. He stayed inside 3 days. Junie noticed. She found him on the 4th morning standing at the window, looking up at the ridge through the ice-glazed glass, his jaw tight the way it got when he was deciding something. "You gonna finish it, Daddy?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he pulled on his coat, his boots, his gloves gone stiff with cold, and walked out into weather no sensible man would call fit for fence work. "Your granddaddy didn't quit on this ground," he said at the door. "I don't aim to be the one that does." He finished the last stretch of fence on a Thursday in early March, driving the final staple into the final post just as the sun broke clean over the ridge for the first time in what felt like a month. Behind him now ran a full loop of taut wire and true cedar posts, following post for post, the exact ghost line of his grandfather's original boundary. It didn't look like much to anyone passing on the county road, just an old man's fence around an old man's worthless hill. But it stood. Complete, and in the county's eyes, that was the whole of what mattered. Garland Hooks came back out in April with his clipboard and his level gaze, walked the full perimeter without saying much, and finally wrote "active agricultural use, verified," in a box that had sat empty for 3 decades. The tax bill held steady. The ridge stayed classified as farmland. Amos figured that was the end of it, a quiet, private win nobody in Noble Fork would ever know or care about. He had no idea that 4 counties away, in a glass-walled office in Lexington, a land agent named Curtis Boone had just circled Breathitt County on a map for reasons that had nothing to do with cattle. The letter came in June, on heavy cream paper with a logo Amos didn't recognize, a Caldwell Ridge Energy, out of Lexington. They were surveying mineral and pipeline right-of-way corridors across 3 counties for a new natural gas compressor station, and preliminary geological data showed the Tewksbury Ridge sitting squarely over one of the richest shale pockets in the region. But the letter warned of a complication. County deed records for that parcel had been destroyed in the 1987 fire, and without a verifiable, continuously maintained boundary, the company's lawyers couldn't confirm clean title, which meant, without proof, the whole project might have to root around Noble Fork entirely. 2 surveyors arrived that August, GPS units strapped to their chests, walking the ridge line inch by inch with an old aerial photograph clipped to a board. Amos watched from his porch as they stopped, again and again, comparing their instruments to the fence he'd rebuilt, his fresh cedar posts lining up, almost eerily, with the faint gray scar visible in a 60-year-old photograph taken from a crop duster plane. One surveyor knelt at a corner post, brushed off the dirt, and called out to his partner in a voice that carried clean across the hollow. "This line's dead accurate. Somebody's been keeping this boundary alive for generations." Word of the surveyors reached the diner within the day. Odell Ferris heard it secondhand from the mill and drove out himself that evening, parking his truck at the bottom of the drive and walking up on foot, something he hadn't done in years. He stood at the new fence line, running his hand along a post he'd once called a waste of good lumber, and said nothing at all for a long moment. Behind him, up on the ridge, orange survey flags now dotted the brush in a tidy, deliberate row, flags that hadn't been there a week before, and that every soul in Noble Fork could see from the county road. By September, the flags had multiplied into a full grid, and a company truck sat parked at the ridge gate most mornings. The talk in town shifted overnight from pity to speculation, from speculation to disbelief. Garland Hooks drove past twice just to look. Curtis Boone himself came out with a folder of paperwork and a number written on it that made Amos sit down hard on his own porch step. His hand pressed flat against his chest, like he was checking his heart was still doing its job. Caldwell Ridge Energy wanted the mineral rights and a permanent easement across the full ridge, and they were prepared to pay for exactly what the fence had proven was his. News like that doesn't stay contained in one house for long. By the following weekend, half of Noble Fork had found a reason to drive the county road past the Tewksbury place, slowing at the fence line the way people slow at a wreck. Except this time, what they were looking at was proof, not ruin. Odell Ferris told it at the diner himself now, a different man telling it than the one who'd laughed months before. "Damn fool fenced his way into a fortune," he said, shaking his head, though there wasn't a trace of mockery left in his voice, only something closer to respect and maybe a little shame. Amos signed the final papers in October, a year almost to the week since he'd first knelt in the frost with that mallet in his hand. The check didn't make him rich in the way people picture rich, no mansion, no new truck he didn't need. But it paid off the mortgage on the equipment, put money away for Junie's schooling, and left enough besides that he never again had to sit at that kitchen table doing arithmetic that came out unkind. He kept the fence exactly as it stood. Didn't add a single post more than the boundary required. It hadn't been built for money. It had simply, finally, been paid for its honesty. These days, folks in Noble Fork still drive past that ridge, but they don't slow down to laugh anymore. Junie's in high school now, and some evenings she still walks the fence line with her father, same as she used to sit on that stump and ask him questions he couldn't quite answer. He can answer this one now. Garland Hooks tells the story at the courthouse to anybody filing a land dispute, calling it the clearest case of boundary by long use he's seen in 30 years of assessing. Odell Ferris tells it too, though his version's grown considerably kinder with every retelling at the diner counter. What stayed with the town wasn't the money. It was the picture of one man on a frozen hillside in the dead of winter, driving posts into ground everybody else had already written off, for reasons he never once bothered explaining to a soul. He didn't need the land to be worth something to keep tending it. He just needed it to still be his, and in the end, the fence that fenced in nothing was the only thing in Breathitt County that remembered exactly where the line had always run. Some ground doesn't need to be beautiful to be worth keeping. It just needs somebody willing to walk its edges until the rest of the world catches up.